Bill C-10, Canada's attempt at online regulation. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. I actually thought that Justin Trudeau was doing relatively well as of late, but he's done an amazing job at changing my mind. And he's done that through Bill C-10. Now, at first glance, the bill might not seem so appalling, but the devils really are in the details, and we'll get to that. I want to begin by taking it from the top. So, from the official Canadian Justice website, Bill C-10 amends the Broadcasting Act, and the Act sets out the broadcasting policy for Canada, the role and powers of the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission. They're going to call it the Commission in the rest of the bill. And their job basically is regulating and supervising the broadcasting system and the mandate of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. The Act plays an important role in supporting Canada's cultural industries and ensuring Canadian content is available and accessible. The Commission's primary regulatory tools under the current Act consist of licensing broadcasting undertakings or exempting classes of undertakings from licensing, imposing conditions of license or of exemption, and passing regulations. So basically, in a nutshell, what that part says there is the Commission has a couple of ways they can enforce the law. The first is enforcing licensing. So if you want to be a part of broadcasting in Canada, you have to get a license from them. And further, they can impose the conditions of the license. So not just that they can make you get a license from them, they will be the ones to enforce the rules of the license. How do you qualify? How do you not qualify? And that's all on them. Passing regulations, do you get an exemption? Do you not? That would fall under their jurisdiction. Now back to the bill here. So traditional over-the-air broadcasters, that is, those that use radio frequencies to deliver audio and audiovisual content, are generally subject to licensing requirements, and that's the current state of affairs. Online undertakings that deliver audio and audiovisual content over the internet are exempt from licensing and most other regulatory requirements, and that's what they want to change. So that's the current state of affairs. The Commission, anything over the air, radio, television, they have authority over that. But now they want to expand their reach into the online domain. That should be the first red flag there. Many questions come up with that. Whenever the topic of regulating the free enterprise of the internet comes up, it inherently has these slippery slope arguments that can be made. And I do think that's applicable here. Bill C-10 clarifies that the Act is now going to apply to the internet, and you have to know the landscape here politically. Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party came up with it, and they support it. But keep in mind, they are a minority government, so they need another party to successfully pass this. And who is that? None other than the NDP. Now, that tag team is behind this. You have Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives saying that they're not for it. It's up to you to decide which side you want to support there, and I hope you can make an informed decision by the end of the conversation. So, let's take a little bit deeper of a look at this bill here. Clause 1. It says that it would add online undertakings as a distinct class of broadcasting undertaking subject to the Act. So adding online broadcasting to the power of the CRTC now. Further, they would define an online undertaking as the transmission or retransmission of programs over the internet to the public by means of a broadcasting receiving apparatus. That's quite the vague definition. In fact, I don't even know if you can call it a definition. It poses more questions than it answers. I do believe that I would qualify under that. I would be subject to the CRTC regulations and moderation now, given this somewhat abstract definition of what it means to be broadcasting online. I'm sure that applies to many YouTube channels and other podcasts as well. And perhaps people are fearing it can slip into what you post online, on your social media. Would that be broadcasting under this definition? Now, the government has had to put in some amendments because there is massive backlash, and they now say users of social media services who upload programs for sharing with other users, but who are not affiliated with the service provider, would not be subject to the broadcasting regulation in that respect. And here we go again with the vagueness. What does that mean? So they're saying here, well, if you're not affiliated, don't worry about it. You won't be incorporated under these regulations. But what does it mean to be affiliated with a broadcaster? If I have a YouTube channel, am I affiliated with YouTube? What if I become a partner? I start making ad revenue. Am I affiliated then? What if I have to pay for hosting services to get my podcast onto a platform? Am I affiliated in that case? Or what if I am verified on a social media platform? Am I affiliated then? Or does me simply having an account mean I'm affiliated? Does affiliated mean any type of relationship and connection? Would I have to be an independent in every sense of the imagination to not be affected by these CRTC guidelines? And that's the problem here. The government has tried to say, hey, we've made it explicitly clear with these amendments that the average person will not be affected, but it doesn't seem that way to me. It's not clear enough. Of course, it could be a byproduct of the fact that the government doesn't even know what they're talking about. We've seen how they've handled big tech and how they've tried to pass laws related to data and the 21st century and whatnot, and how spectacularly oblivious they've been. So maybe it's that. Or maybe there's an ulterior motive here. Maybe it is a slippery slope that's intentionally being pushed. I'm not too sure what the case is, but either way, this bill is ominous. And we're going to talk more about the other clauses here. So now let's move on to number 20. It would specify that a person shall not carry on a broadcasting undertaking other than an online undertaking unless they do so in accordance with a license or they are exempt from the requirement to hold a license. At first glance, it seems to me that this is saying that online broadcasters will not be required to have a license at this point in time, but the way it's phrased, it seems like it's something that's on their mind. Maybe after the initial backlash and the controversial response to this bill is done away with, maybe that gets changed there, and that would be a major problem. Imagine being an online broadcaster, whatever that means, someone who talks about current events, puts out content, and you would need a license to even post. Who will determine the criteria? Well, as it's laid out so far, it'd be the CRTC. And who makes the rules? Well, it's the CRTC. They are both the enforcer and the judge here, and the jury, and perhaps even the executioner too. Because if you don't comply, you'll be done away with. You'll get no license and you'll have no right to continue on with your behavior. And what are the consequences there? Probably a fine. And if you don't pay the fine, maybe jail time. But as it currently stands, Clause 20 is saying that, well, if you're broadcasting in any other domain, if it's not via the internet, maybe you have an independent radio channel or whatever, you need to have a license, and if you don't have it, you can't do your activity. Here, I do understand the need for some type of conformity to certain standards. You don't want complete craziness popping up on popular broadcasting channels, but there is, once again, ambiguity here. We don't know what they mean by license. We don't know what criteria you have to meet to get that. We don't know how fluidly they'll be able to change it at a dime. We don't know if there's going to be political considerations tied up in it. And these are the questions that rational people have. Then we can move on to Clause 7 now. It says that it will replace the Commission's power to impose conditions on a license with a power to make orders imposing conditions on the carrying on of broadcasting undertakings. So, first of all, the Commission did have the power to impose conditions on a license. So, you can only get it if you do this, you will lose it if you do that. Those are the conditions of the license, but now they're going to be getting a new power altogether. They're going to be able to make orders imposing conditions on the carrying of broadcasting undertakings. So forget the license. If you are going to broadcast in general, they're going to lay down the law for that. They used to only have the domain for a license. If you were a licensee, here's what you can do, what you can't do. If you're an independent or whatever, it's a whole separate area. Now, though, it's amalgamated. If you are going to be broadcasting, they're going to tell you what's allowed and what's not. Once again, that could be a problem. It brings to mind, well, what kind of stipulations would the CRTC put into place? And it says here that the power would include conditions about the proportion of programs that must be Canadian. So, for something like Netflix or YouTube, they'll say, hey, of all your programming, 25% of it has to be Canadian. So they're forcing some type of outcome. It doesn't matter if the Canadian programming sucks, nobody wants to watch it. They don't care about that data and the market. They're saying you have to do this, and if you don't do it, you cannot broadcast in Canada. And the companies, not wanting to miss out on that revenue, they're going to comply, even if it's not what the consumers want. And there are arguments for and against it. Generally speaking, Canadian productions are not of the highest quality. If you think about Canadian TV, Schitt's Creek is probably the only show that comes to mind of being of this higher caliber show that people actually want to watch. The rest of it is the quality differs. We'll put it like that. Now, maybe it's due to a lack of resources. Maybe it's not. Well, maybe by forcing the companies to put on Canadian shows, we can get more resources into the Canadian market and improve the quality there. That's one argument. The other argument is people don't want to watch it, and they're going to find ways to not watch it. You can flood the market with all this Canadian content, but if it sucks, no one's going to be giving you the eyeballs. No one's going to be watching it, and your ratings are going to tank further. And on top of that, if the Canadian Netflix sucks, while people are tech savvy, they can just get a VPN, connect to the American Netflix, and bypass this entirely. So, does it make any sense to force an outcome? Maybe not so much. If the Canadian content cannot get in based on its own merit, maybe there is an equality of opportunity to look at. How do we enable Canadian producers to make better content versus forcing Netflix to put it on regardless of that? On that point, I am agnostic. I'm not too sure where I stand per se, but that's not even the main thing that concerns me within this clause here. There's a further piece. It says that it would empower the commission to make orders imposing conditions on people carrying on broadcasting undertakings, so maybe like me podcasting, including conditions with respect to the provision of information to the commission. So the commission can come to me and say, hey, we want to find out about this. And if I say, well, that's private, they're going to say, too bad. We make the rules. Fork it over. Now, what could that information be? Who knows? Audience demographics, this and that, my current billing plans, who knows? But it is questionable as to whether or not the CRTC should even be able to do that. Why do they have the sole authority here to make rules like that and to establish conditions? To be able to request on-demand provision of information to this commission? Is the commission God now? Do they supersede the individual sovereign rights that you get by being a Canadian citizen? When my privacy rights clash with the commission's new rights under this bill to request any information they want from me, who wins that? It is suspect. And then we can move on to another clause here, clause number 8. It would amend the commission's power to make regulations, including a new power to make regulations requiring broadcasting undertakings to register with the commission. So, first of all, they had this old power to make regulations. Now they're going to be including a new power to make regulations requiring broadcasters to register with the commission. So forget the license. That was one part of it. Now, if you want to be a broadcaster, well, hold on, let's backtrack. The license is how they diverted your attention. They're saying, okay, the license, we're going to make that only for if you're affiliated with the platform. Who knows what that means? But now they're saying, hey, but aside from that, forget being affiliated and the license. We're going to have the power to make you register with us. Why would I want to register with the CRTC? What benefit is that? What purpose will that serve? Well, they'd be able to watch you a lot closer. They'd be able to monitor you and the content you put out. From the content creator standpoint, that is not attractive at all. Further, I don't know why they'd even be given that power. It seems like they're getting a lot of power here. Read through the bill. Many of these clauses have to do with expanding the scope of their jurisdiction, and that is worrisome. Then you have Clause 9. It would amend the Commission's power to make regulations regarding fees to be paid by persons carrying on broadcasting undertakings. So, here we go. You have the power to set up the law. Now you have the power to set up the consequences to total control over the domain for the CRTC, an entity that we don't even know is apolitical and who will act fairly. Here's a tip. Generally speaking, if you don't want the government to abuse a certain type of power, don't give it to them in the first place. Why would you arm them with something so dangerous and then pray that it won't be used malignantly against you? Why not give them a foam sword then that can still get the job done maybe, but won't have the dual benefit of them being able to slice you down with it? This is a ridiculous act. So, here, if you don't agree with what they're saying, if you don't want to register, well, they have the power to make regulations regarding fines to be paid by you for disagreeing with them. Maybe they'll make it $1,000, maybe they'll make it $5, maybe they'll make it $10,000. Who knows? They can decide that for themselves. It doesn't seem very democratic to me. To have this one commission be so powerful, to have this one commission gaining all these new powers because of Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh, I don't like that. And the list does go on a little bit more. We can look at Clause 10 now. It would give the Commission a new express regulation making and order making power to require persons carrying on broadcasting undertakings to make expenditures to support the Canadian broadcasting system. So, it's not just that they can make any regulation they want. It will be a new express regulation making and order making power. So, usually when they say express, it means cutting out process. Maybe before, you'd have to talk to advisors, you'd have to get the public's opinion. Forget that. That's out the window now. It's an express decision-making procedure. When they have an idea, an inkling of a new fine that they want to put out, they'll do it overnight. And you'll be responsible for complying with that if you want to continue to be able to broadcast in Canada. And here, they're saying they can do something like making it mandatory to make expenditures, basically pay them to support the Canadian broadcasting system. Once again, I don't know if that should be mandatory. If the Canadian broadcasting system sucks and it can't make money for itself, it does beg the question of if these donations will do anything, except for line the pocket of the government institution. Now, I do understand maybe you have to pay for your license because there are operational costs and whatnot, but it's not clear here what they even mean by support the Canadian broadcasting system. Maybe I don't want to support them. Maybe they don't deserve my support. Of course, I'll pay the licensing fee if you have to, and you can use that money to do whatever you want. But if you're talking about making expenditures as a percentage of a organization's or a broadcaster's profits or revenue, then it's questionable. And once again, the CRTC, the sole authority on that. Now with express regulation making power to get what they want across the table. Will that damage the Canadian broadcasting economy? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe it'll make things better. It's undetermined, but regardless of that, regardless where you stand on it, it seems clear to me that it would be far better if these powers were more spread out. If you did have to rely on consultation and it was not an express power system, if you did have to carefully think things through and get the public opinion and whatnot, as in a traditional democracy, having these CRTCs so congregated, so congested with these new powers and privileges, I just don't see how it will play out in our favor as a regular citizen. Now, we can talk about Clause 11. It would amend the Commission's power to inquire into, hear, and determine controversies of regulatory requirements. So, here we go again. More power. The Commission can inquire, hear, and determine controversies of regulatory requirements. So, it's just more power. Regulatory requirements. What would allow you to be considered a broadcaster? Are you talking about contentious things? Maybe they're going to inquire into that and amend the regulatory requirements to make it so that you can't broadcast anymore. Now, don't get me wrong. It was a separate situation when the CRTC was trying to regulate the radio system and television. These were never things that the average citizen had access to begin with. You typically had to be a corporation or at the very least a small business, and there are certain rules and responsibilities that come along with that. But the government clearly here is moving along now, going into the domain of the internet, which does affect the average citizen because anyone can be a broadcaster if they want to. Anyone can start making videos about this and that on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts, wherever. And based on these broad definitions, you could very well be a publisher. And they could force you to get a license now to continue on with your publishing. And keep in mind too, they make the criteria for the license, they make the criteria for the fine, They make the criteria for everything. They have all that power now. Do you expect them to do a good job? Knowing just how inefficient the government has been in the first place when it comes to the online world? Does the online world require this type of government oversight? Do we want them to be making these vague guidelines of, hey, don't worry, if you're not affiliated, you'll be safe, when affiliation could mean simply having an account? They're being vague on purpose here. The heritage minister will go on TV and say, no, the average person is fine. But the bill itself has wording that could implicate the average person, and I don't know if they are fine. It's a terribly written proposal. It's a terrible idea, arguably. And maybe that's because of how it was written. Maybe if they frame this in a better way, with less power, with more moderation, it could have been something that we could have stomached, but they've taken a massive step here towards online regulation and cracking down on internet freedom. And I don't trust the government with that type of power. It is worrisome. The thing that you have to understand is that this may not very well be the end game. It could turn out to be just the first step. Maybe they begin by making you register with the CRTC and they say, hey, forget the license, but maybe next year they say, hey, you need a license now. I can very easily see Trudeau making the argument of, hey, we've seen an influx of fake news and hate speech and whatever else online, and it's unacceptable. So therefore, we, the government, have to come in here and regulate things because you, the average citizen, can't handle to deal with that on your own. We're going to come in as the good big brother and handle things for you. We'll make sure you only see things that are not controversial, that aren't going to get you triggered, and whatever else they have on their itinerary. And what do you find yourself in now? You find yourself in a situation similar to China, where the government has full control over what you see online. And if you want to put something up there, you have to be licensed by the state. And if the state doesn't like you, if you don't like what you're saying, well, too bad. You're gone. This truly is only a couple steps away from that. It's the inkling of something of an authoritarian regime, and I don't think Trudeau is trying to establish that, but I do think he's foolish enough to open the gates to it. And I look at him as somebody who has been ripe with these scandals from SNC to the We Charity, blunder after blunder, not really thinking about his actions, and now he's championing this bill here that has so many obvious implications, and it has the Canadian population up in arms. Many people are against this, and it doesn't matter if you're left-leaning or right-leaning, whatever. I've seen it across the spectrum. There's virtually nobody who supports this bill. And even with the foolish amendments that are so vague and broad, still, it's problematic. And I do hope it gets shut down, and I do encourage you to take measures to ensure that happens, whether it's calling up your local member of parliament, or signing petitions, or having your voice heard. Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh are off the rail here. If you think the CRTC is deserving of all this power and they will never abuse it, and it's perfect as is, this bill is amazing, it's a monocle, something to be admired, and every country should have it, well, I don't know what to tell you. Simply take a closer look at it and read the clauses. What Trudeau is saying on TV and the Heritage Minister does not align with what's being proposed here. And that's probably a general lesson. What a politician says and what they do, they rarely align. What they say and what they propose, they rarely align. They try to dumb down things so the average person can just overlook it, but I'm telling you not to do that. Look into it. Read the clauses, read the entire thing on the Canadian Justice website, and see for yourself just how many areas there are for things to go wrong here. If this bill goes back to the debate session and they cut out certain powers and privileges, and it does beg the question, what are they actually trying to accomplish? If they're simply trying to accomplish an area where Canadian production gets more broadcasting on Netflix and YouTube, and we get more funding for Canadian heritage content, cultural content, whatever, you can do that. And there's debate there if you even want to, but you can do that without all this excess. They're trying to do that while they're also trying to regulate the individual content creator. It doesn't add up. They're trying to achieve multiple things here. If they can hone the focus and make the bill far less over-encompassing, there could be something to do here. It wouldn't be as bad. But they've jam-packed it with extra powers and privileges for seemingly ominous reasons, and I can't support that. If the government ever wants to dabble in the realm of the internet and new age technology, they have to prove themselves. Right now, they seem like blundering fools to me. I'm not going to trust a blundering fool with these kind of powers. And even if they were competent, I would still question whether or not it's necessary. But they're not even at that competent stage yet. So, truly think about how this could affect the Canadian online internet landscape and if it's worth taking that risk. As always, I'll keep you up to date on the latest developments here, and I do hope this bill gets thrown out, and Trudeau should apologize for putting something so foolish forward. And it's a shame that we don't truly have options that are going to make him pay politically. As we talked about before, you're not going to vote for Jagmeet Singh because of this. He's here supporting it too. And Aaron O'Toole, although trying to be more centrist, he hasn't truly solidified himself as someone the Conservative Party can trust, or people even in the middle can trust. So even though Trudeau is ripe with scandals and seemingly encroachments into certain types of freedoms, he's still looking pretty good, and that's a disaster. So something there has to change, and we can talk more about that next time. For now, that brings us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.